Welcome, everybody, to The Price of Knowledge with Laura Struble and Paul Miller. This is Paul Miller, and I'm very excited to be joined today by student Laura Struble. We're going to be talking about the price of education and discuss, hopefully, some ways we might be able to save you a little bit of money out there. So I do want to introduce Laura Struble. Laura, it's such a pleasure to be here on the show with you today.
I'm excited to be here.
So first of all, I want to ask you before we get into the episode proper, if you will, what was it about this topic that was so interesting to you that you wanted to move forward with this podcast?
Right. So I think all of us can agree that education can be quite expensive. And I think it's important to kind of dive into what we're really spending our expenses on when it comes to college. And it's something that all of us here at Central Penn can really take some notes on. And if there's anything that can help us with the cost of tuition, textbooks, room and board, then I think we'd all be open to hear about it.
Well, and I certainly think too that while we are related to or associated with Central Penn College, I would also just point out that this is really good information for anyone. This is good for parents. This is good for current students. This is good for future students. So no matter what we do, education and higher education at least is always going to have some type of cost associated with it. And I look at it as sort of our duty here to try to help everybody as best as we can, try to tackle things like how to save money on tuition. You mentioned textbooks as well, and of course, room and board. So that's what our goals are for today. I'm very excited to get down to business with you.
Me too.
All right, well, I'll kick it over to you to lead us off on the first segment here. We're going to talk a little bit more about tuition costs.
Right. So tuition is something that I think right away that a lot of students can have a little bit of turn away when it comes to price of college. And so I just think it's very interesting that according to College Board data, that almost 30% of students graduated with student loans in the 23 to 2024 school year. And that is something that I think is important for myself that other students are doing that as well. It's pretty expensive and a lot of people can be turned away from the price, but I think overall the return on your money and with your career, it's a great investment.
Laura, one of the things that I always sort of struggle to talk to students about is that this college, higher education, is an investment in you. The money that you're taking out, and by extension, the money that potentially parents or loved ones, etc., are taking out, is an investment in you getting that degree. And have been study after study after study that have shown that people with a high school degree make much considerably less than people with even an associate's or bachelor's degree. So realistically speaking, as long as you go to school, you do well and do the things you need to do and get your degree, that investment is going to pay off. But Laura, there's one really important thing that I think when I speak with students, I hear a lot is that people just honestly don't know what the differences are between a public and a private institution. A public institution is just simply an institution that does receive some type of funding either from their local area in terms of like a community college or from their state government. Like in Pennsylvania, we have the PSAC schools, the Slippery Rock, Shippensburgs, Millersvilles of the world. And that's really all it is that it's sort of a subsidy that helps reduce the price for a state school. It's not necessarily more or less exclusive or more or less prestigious. In some cases, it could be. But that's something that is important to understand is that if you can get into a public school, that is one way you could save yourself some money. And as a proud attendee of three of our state schools, I am certainly living proof that, going to a state school can be helpful for you.
I agree with you on that point.
So one of the things that I did want to talk about is, just essentially why is the tuition as much as it is? And I know that this is part of what we're here to help with. My biggest concern, Laura, in my experience, is that many students, and again, I don't make it a habit of trying to get involved with people's financial information or how they're paying for school because I'm the professor. That's frankly none of my business if people don't want it to be. But I think the biggest problem in my experience is simply that most students rely almost entirely in some cases on financial aid instead of looking up other means to pay their bill, whether that is only taking a certain amount of student aid out and maybe paying cash by having a part-time job or an on-campus job in some cases. Maybe it's looking for scholarship dollars. I mean, even here at Central Penn, we only have 15 to 20% of students who even apply for the biannual scholarships. And I don't understand why that is. And let's say most schools have a foundation that offers students scholarships. There's also grants out there as well. I just think it's too easy. I'm not saying I want it to be harder, but I think it's too easy to get student loans. And hey, doing a scholarship actually takes a little bit of research and time. Do you think that that weighs into a lot of the issues with tuition?
Right, I see what you're saying. So I think they do make it really easy. I have done quite a few scholarships and I've also done the Pell Grant. And I think it's what makes it turn away students is they often require a essay. And so all of us are doing a good bit of essays during the term. And in my point of view, if it can save you some money, then why not put in that extra time just to write the essay?
You're preaching to the choir here. I'm not really sure what else to say. Especially because, even at Central Penn, if it's not to say you're guaranteed if you apply, but at worst, there are $500 awards, and that's at worst. Meaning that if you spend, I don't know, an hour writing an essay, you get a $500 off of your account. But I think that you're bringing up a really important point here, and that is that most people choose the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is to sign on the dotted line, take money out that they have to pay back. But at the time, we don't care about future us. I always use this analogy in class. Like a lot of times we put future us to the side and only worry about present day us. And that's one of the reasons that I think that this is a serious issue that I think merits discussion. In fact, I just met with a friend over the weekend who was getting ready to send their senior student off to college. And he wanted to know some of these tips that we're talking about right now. And I just simply said, I would say to anyone, as somebody who, has gone to and taught at a local community college, I think for most students, it could make sense to do their first year at a community college, have people pay cash for that because it's very affordable, and then the individual student has a little bit more financial aid money that they can take out. Now, one thing our federal government did that was great, Laura, was that basically they have set a cap to what a dependent student is able to take out in student loans. Maybe a decade ago, people were getting out of school with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. Now there's a line. If you're a dependent student, you can only take out about $25,000. And then the rest of it needs to be either Parent Plus loans, paid cash, etc. So that's something else that should help families plan that their students are going to be able to take a little bit of money out. But that doesn't necessarily address some of the tuition issues here either. I would just say to, Laura, you mentioned Pell Grants. I'm talking about scholarships, but really it should be your last resort to take out loans. And unfortunately for many, it's their first resort.
Yeah, and even whenever it comes to writing the essays, a lot of times if you look into it, they can be quite fun and quite interesting. They're just learning a little bit more about you. And it can even be a fun essay just to look at it that way. And just the reward aside, it can be a fun essay.
And I would just encourage anyone out there to look into your individual school that you're going to. I almost guarantee they have some sort of foundation that often allows these, whether it's annually or biannually in the case of Central Penn, allows opportunities for students to apply. But of course, filling out the FAFSA every year can open up other means of affording and paying for your education, but it's just a plea from me to all of you listeners out there. Do everything you can to try to pay other ways than just taking out massive amounts of loans for your education. Any final thoughts, Laura?
Right. I think these are all great points. I think whenever it comes to taking out loans, it's also important to think that you may feel like you're a step ahead because you're not out of the money, out of your pocket at the moment, but it can set you back in the future. So that's a good thing to think about as well.
All right, well, that's this first segment. We're going to be right back here in just a minute, talk a little bit more about textbook costs and ways you can save money on that. We are here on the Price of Knowledge podcast with Laura Struble and Paul Miller. We'll be right back. You are listening to the Price of Knowledge podcast with Laura Struble and Paul Miller. Stay tuned. All right, back here with the Price of Knowledge podcast with Paul Miller and Laura Struble. Something that we, obviously, the first segment, we talked a lot about tuition and some ways that people can think about different ways of financing their education. That's not just about student loans. This is more, a little bit closer to my heart because I got a lot of really good tips and tricks for ways that students can save money on their books. You know, Laura, it is a crime what the book publishing industry does. I hope they don't hear me say that, but it is a crime what the book publishing industry does in terms of the amount of money that they charge for books. And I'm going to tell you something else. This might be a surprise. As someone who is a published author of a academic textbook, Laura, any idea how much money I got paid?
Not sure.
Well, $0. I got paid absolutely nothing to write a book chapter. Now, listen, it's not to say that some people might not or don't get paid, but honestly, many of the professors who contribute to these types of publications do not receive much, if any, compensation. And then the book publishers will turn around and fill in a number of what these books cost. Some can cost anywhere from $50 up to, in some cases, 150 or even more. I know people in the healthcare industry have often discussed the vast price of books. So, Laura, I'm going to kick it over to you to give us a little bit of an introduction on this topic.
Right. So that was pretty eye-opening just to hear your perspective right there. It can be quite costly. Textbooks add up very quickly. I have found one thing that has helped me throughout my years is using ebooks. An ebook can be 50% less expensive than its hard copy counterpoint, and that is found at Education Data Initiative. I think that's a really great option because it can be a little overwhelming to have a stack of books on your desk. And with having the option of having online classes, it can be so convenient just to have all your books just at one spot on your computer, just to go to one place for them. And it has just been great for me. And so I really recommend that to anyone else who is listening and maybe they have hard copies. Save a little bit of money and then also save a little bit of the stress trying to find out your books and just having a full bookshelf at home for you.
You know, Laura, I think that's wonderful. Ebooks are not for everyone. I do not like ebooks. I will not buy an ebook. I would much rather have the book in front of me. I can write in it. And this is sort of an age-old debate. And I don't want to get into that because to me, that's a preference thing. It's a great point that it can save you money. But if you're like me and really like the book, and as a professor, what I suggest, this is just my suggestion, is that the issue with ebooks is you're literally only paying to essentially rent it. Even if you buy it, you don't actually own it. And so say you bought it for like a Kindle or something like that. You may be able to access it for a certain period of time and then that sort of a license that you've bought is up. When I buy a book, Laura, it's mine. Unless someone's coming over to my house and coming into my room and taking it from me, it's mine, or unless I sell it. So what I suggest is made books from your major. So if you're in marketing, if you're in communication, keep the hard copies of those books, and those books are going to help you in the future in as you enter your career. Now, I can certainly understand why some people might not want to have every single book that they've ever had if they don't feel that they're ever going to need it in the future. I'm just trying to give you some perspective on sort of both sides of the ebook versus physical book, although I'm sure we could have a whole podcast series dedicated to this particular argument.
That's a really good point. I think it is up to personal preference for that. The average college student spends 174 on new printed textbooks for the year, and that's according to Education Data Initiative.
And I'll be honest,
I
that
think
seems kind of low.
that's where it gets me is it adds up over time. But another thing that I like to do is a lot of professors point out this option as well is whenever you go on Amazon that you can find used textbooks or you could find someone who had previously taken the class and then you can get it at a buddy rate rather than buying for a brand new textbook.
Yeah, in today's day and age, unless a book is brand new, you absolutely should not buy it new. It should be used. Now, one of the things that I try to do, and I do mean this sincerely, is professors generally speaking are aware of what the costs of the textbooks are. We are cognizant of the cost of these books, and I actually not always, but I try to find books that are affordable. Maybe it's not the best book, maybe it's not the book I prefer, but if one book's $100 and one book's $30, like I'm almost always gonna go with the $30 textbook. So I don't want students out there to think like, oh, our professors, they're not cognizant of these types of things. We are. We know what the list price of these textbooks is. I mean, that's all part of sort of the pitch that we have. So one of the things that I've been trying to do, at least in my communication department, is to try to find books that are affordable but yet useful at the same time.
That's great to hear because I do notice a lot of professors. I would say that it's not an outrageous amount of prices for the books, and so it's really great to see the professor's point of view of whenever they're picking out a class for the book and their thought process behind it. So as a student, I thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I do have just a couple of other tips here. Here's one I don't know that a lot of people really consider. Now, Laura, I know that you're predominantly an online student, and I understand that you may not have as the knowledge as some of the folks that are in your classes that people on campus might. But one very easy suggestion that I really ask students a lot is look, if you know someone else in that class and you're friends with somebody else, just split the book. Like, split the book, pay half each, and then develop some type of schedule, like who's going to have the book when, and sort of just trade it off every once in a while, especially on those high dollar books. So say you have biology and that book's 150 bucks, like just split it and then you both can use it. Here's another thing, Laura. Many of the libraries around colleges have these books. Now, most of the time they're on reserve, which means that if you would go down to the library, you could use that book while you're there. You couldn't sign it out. So that's another thing is to have some foresight, look ahead to see if the library has a copy. And I'll do you one better, Laura. Some of my classes actually have ebooks that are available through campus libraries. In fact, there are several books or classes that I have had that have ebooks. So again, there sometimes are limited licenses. There can only be a certain number of people at a certain amount of time looking at the book. But again, all of these are ways. And here's sort of one final suggestion. If you literally cannot afford a book, and instead of not having a book at all, buy an older edition. So if you're on edition 5, look back at the fourth edition because 99 times out of 100, once edition 5 comes out, edition 4 tanks in price. Now, this doesn't always work, and you do have to look at like how old edition 4 is versus edition 5. If it's only a couple of years old, there's a really good chance that 95% of that information is the same or similar. Now, maybe when you get into some of like case studies and things like that, I understand that it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. It's better than having no book at all. And often you can get those books for like $5 to $10.
Yeah, I think that kind of runs into the same point that we were making with the tuition, that just taking that extra step just to do your research, just to figure out what your options are, it can really save you in the long run.
Absolutely. Well, Laura, that was really insightful. I what I love about this show so far is that we are really getting sort of both sides of the spectrum. We're getting a side of a student perspective, we're getting a side from a faculty member, and I really think that this information is super helpful. So that's going to do it for this segment. We have one more segment talking a little bit more about room and board costs, which frankly is probably one of the largest costs of any of them. So hang on, we'll be right back.
This is The Price of Knowledge with Laura Struble and Professor Paul Miller.
All right, we are back here with the Price of Knowledge with Laura Struble and Paul Miller. So far to this point, we've talked about tuition costs. We've talked about some ways that students can save money on their textbooks. But Laura, now we come to probably one of the biggest issues, and it is room and board. I want to lead this segment by telling a story. I have a daughter who recently just graduated from college, and we're very proud of her, and she has a job and is doing wonderfully. But when she went to her first year of school at her university, I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to besmirch them, but her room and board was for one academic year $12,000, which actually is, now that based on the articles that you've looked at, it's actually a little bit below average, which is shocking. But what was interesting about this is it's $12,000 is a lot of money. I mean, that's more than I pay for my mortgage on a month by month, right? The problem that we're seeing here, and yes, that is food and there are other, things that are involved with that, but this is really the money maker for most colleges. This is often how these colleges sort of stay above water by continuing to raise the room and board prices. Now, Laura, it is fair to say that living expenses have gone up tremendously since COVID. Housing prices have gone through the roof. Rent prices have gone through the roof. So it only makes sense that housing on a college campus is maybe not affordable, but it is more expensive. Here is my question, and this is the question that I really think that we need the answer to. Many colleges are requiring students to stay on campus a certain length of time, whether that be 1 year, 2 years, or maybe even all 4 years, as a way to increase the amount of money that they are receiving from their students. What do you think that that's ethical?
For me personally, I am a avid online learner. I find that it makes it a lot more easier to just get in your room and then just really hone away in the books and just into the lessons. I understand the importance, though, of being able to connect with your peers. And so I can see the aspect of that. I think it makes making connections on campus a lot more accessible and it just deepens your college experience. But I think at the same time, too, if that is the money maker and that's the whole intent behind it, I don't think they're going with the right intent moving forward if that's the way that they're thinking.
No, and I 100% agree. And that to me is what really, I didn't mind paying the tuition. I honestly didn't. I understand what tuition prices are. I value that tuition dollars because there's something tangible there. You're getting credits that could be transferred or what have you. The room and board, part of the issue here and part of the reason that you continue to see these prices go up is because students 16, 17, 18-year-old traditional college students, they are looking for the amenities. They are looking for their own room. They are looking for a private bathroom. They are looking for, more. I mean, Laura, when I went to school, I had a room, and I didn't even go to school that long ago. There was a room. It was me, it was my roommate, and that's it. Like it wasn't, there weren't all these amenities. When I walked into her, she had her own room, they had their own bathroom, little kitchen. I mean, that stuff, and that was like one of the lower tier. Now, when you go to these colleges, there's like different tiers of living conditions that you can have. And even the lowest one, that's what that $12,000 was. And it was just like, it's because the students at that age, they want those things. Well, you know what? I would have wanted my own room back then too. But at the same time, like it just doesn't resonate with me that these prices continue to go up because of what the teenagers in this case demand versus what's most financially reasonable.
Right. I think my age group is going through the shock of understanding that all these luxuries come at a price and it's catching up to us. We like nice things, we like shiny objects, but at the same time, you have to pay for it. You have to get to that price point, and that's where it's very tough. And that's where you got to really hone in on what is a need and what is a want.
I couldn't have said it better myself. You know, another thing is that we often have to think about, some ways to lower costs. There are a variety of ways to lower costs, and the biggest one, and probably most important one, is that, what I would honestly advise for the price conscious consumer is to do what I actually did with my daughter and had her go her first year to community college. Those credits all transfer. Many community colleges have articulation agreements, which is just a fancy term for, hey, we'll take your credits and here's what they'll transfer for. It's very affordable. Most community colleges don't have on campus living. Some do, but if you can, if your student will deal with living at home for one extra year, the savings are immense. And then that way, if they go to a school where they are required to live on campus for an amount of time, if it's only 2 years, it's only 1 year they have to live on campus and then can find their own sort of off campus housing. I know that that's not for everyone. And frankly, I also, on the other hand, Laura, part of the big conversation I had with that friend I mentioned in the last segment was from a peer standpoint that to say you're going to community college has a negative connotation in high schools, and I wonder if you wanted to speak to what amount you think that weighs into these decisions, whether it going to community college or even to a state school.
Right. So I think what a lot of people they first think about is that you're not getting the full college experience. It's a lot about going out and meeting other people and making new connections, new friends. And so I think when a lot of people hear community college, they think I'm going to be surrounded with the same people I went to high school with, and it's going to be the same community that you grew up with. And I think that is something that isn't always the case. And so it's very interesting to see how community college can really be great for making new connections and meeting new friends as well.
Yeah, and I really do think it's sort of like peer judgment, and that students in high school are so concerned about what their peers think about them that if they would have to quote unquote admit that they're going to go to community college for a year, they'd be afraid of what other people might think of them.
Mhm.
That being said, though, Laura, most community colleges are more regional. So even if you would, I mean, are you going to know some people who go there? Probably, but it's not going to be everyone. And again, the savings, so you save that, on average $15,000 annually just not living on campus that first year. But here's the thing that my daughter experienced. As soon as she got on campus, she got that. So she still had 3 years on campus. She got that interaction. She got that networking. Yeah, she was a sophomore and some of her friends were sophomores or even freshmen, but was that savings worth it? As the parent, I would say yes. But I can also, Laura, understand why when we think about college, it's this rite of passage. We want to go on to the next thing. We want to get to meet new people and we want to hit the ground running. And there's just, you just don't think about how much 10, 15, $20,000 is just for room and board when you're that age. And that's sort of the balance that parents have to walk.
Right. It's definitely a perspective shift. It's interesting how the perspective of a parent, it's very interesting to hear your perspective. I was a community college goer at first too, and I see a lot of upsides to it. And I definitely would recommend to any friends and family that it's a great option.
Listen, I went to our local community college. I taught at our local community college. My wife and daughter both attended community college for a portion of their education. And honestly, it's probably one of the best decisions that we've ever made. It is great to save yourself some money. It is great. The education is just as good as anywhere else. And I think for, again, the cash conscious individual trying to really take a strong look at how much college is going to cost, I think it's certainly not the worst decision that you could make for your family. Well, Laura, this has been just wonderful to get to talk about these things, but I do want to just come back and just recap a couple things, and I'm going to come to you for some final thoughts. So, at the beginning, we talked a lot about tuition costs, and some suggestions that we had were to look for grants, fill out your FAFSA, and most certainly look to your individual institution for their scholarship foundation. In the end, your student loans that you take out should be the last resort. It shouldn't be the first thing that you do because, again, not only are you collecting interest and you pay much more back than you actually take out, which, as a recent graduate of my PhD, I'm just now figuring out. But it also, I think it's just sort of an easy way out. And unfortunately, it's by far the most expensive. In our second segment, we talked a bit about books, and Laura offered some suggestions like using ebooks, and I offered some suggestions, or also talked about buying used books, and I offered some suggestions of check your local library or your campus library, split a book with a friend, or even buy an old edition at worst case scenario. And then, of course, we just talked a little bit more about room and board. If you're trying to save some money on room and board, first of all, maybe a college close to you can commute to, or maybe even considering a year of community college before you make the full leap to go living on campus during your sophomore year, are all ways that you can save yourself money out there. Laura, what about some final thoughts here in terms of your experience?
Yeah, so I would say the lifesavers for me is just taking the small steps to really find out the financial aid you can get, find out all of the grants that you can get or scholarships, and just really take time in doing your research and getting all those things available to you. And to really take the time just to look at the textbook options to make them more affordable. And all these small steps really add up over time. So it's just a great way just to really have that extra money in your pocket just by taking those extra steps.
Well, just as a final wrap up, first of all, doing your research is important, is imperative. You have to have conversations with your student that, yes, their notoriety and the way that people think about them because they're going to a certain school is important to them. But as a parent, you have to explain to them that more about the cost and the long-term impacts of taking out these loans. Laura, it's been such a pleasure to be on the show with you today. Thank you so much for your time. And I think we gave everyone some cost-saving tips when it comes to higher education.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This is The Price of Knowledge with Paul Miller and Laura Struble. We'll see you again next time.